So we're continuing the Fatal 4-Way Handicap match with Yuji, Akoto, and Rika taking on Sukuna. And we're also finding out how Akoto's domain expansion works, along with all of the techniques that he has copied and is able to use. We're also getting an update on what's going on with Yuji and how his abilities are working against Sukuna and what he plans to do against him. And we're getting a big twist at the end because it turns out that Akoto is able to use Sukuna's own technique against him. But anyway, let's get into explaining Akoto's domain expansion. So his all-encompassing, unequivocal love domain allows him to choose any of his copied techniques to use as the domain sure hit effect. And we didn't know that in the previous chapter because it just wasn't explained, because you know most domain expansions have like a sure hit effect to them, where if you just enter it, you're going to be hit with something instantly. And Akoto's is he can just choose any of the techniques that he's copied to have that ability. However, this isn't working on Sukuna because he has used his hollow wicker basket technique, which is essentially the same thing as like simple domain, which protects him from the sure hits of a domain expansion. However, the rest of Akoto's domain expansion is more or less what we speculated that it would be yesterday, because his remaining copy techniques are scattered randomly among the katanas in the domain. And only Akoto can use them, of course, but he doesn't even know which katana contains which technique until he grabs it for the first time. And then after he uses the katana with this certain technique, it can only be used once, but there's an infinite number of the katanas, so he can just keep going around and grabbing more after that. So yeah, pretty busted domain. It's really good, just, you know, as a whole, because, you know, most domain expansions will essentially just kill you if you don't have like the adequate defense against it. But like if you do have a equally powerful domain to go against him, or you have some kind of barrier technique, this is really good for that. Like his continuous use of katanas with curse techniques that he has copied and imbued with them is amazing, obviously. And we see him use Drew's ability through a katana against Sukuna here. Now, Druv is one of Akoto's, if not, I think his first opponent in the culling game. It was like back around chapter 173 or 174, somewhere around there, when he was in Sendai Colony, you know, the big introduction to Akoto's fights. In that colony, there was like 4 special great individuals. There was Ryu, Uro, Kuro Irushi, and then Druv. And Druv was just instantly killed by Akoto, like slashed up, done. Hey, real quick guys, if you could also follow me on TikTok or Instagram, whichever platform you like to use more. I upload TikToks and Reels on there every day. So if you could really support me, I'm trying to get to 10,000 followers on either of the platforms. I'd really appreciate it, guys. Thank you. And his technique was to use Shikigamis to create, as Sukuna says here, an inviolable barrier via its trajectory. So like if the Shikigami goes in a direction or whatever, it's kind of trailing along this barrier behind it, kind of like a trail behind a jet. And then that trail, I guess, cuts you, or it just hurts you, because it's worked this way every time that Akoto has used it. Because we see when he uses the Shikigamis that look like Rika to create the trajectory barriers, they cut Sukuna on the back here. And when he did it back at Sendai Colony against Uro, it did the same thing. But I guess it's invisible. Like, we do see the trajectory being mapped out here, like in outlines on the page, but I guess that's just visible to the reader, because when Sukuna backs into it, that's when he gets cut. And this could be an important sequence, because blood being drawn from Sukuna here could be giving us insight into how Akoto gets his technique, possibly. I don't know, but I have a lot to say about that, but we'll get into it later on. But after Sukuna falls into that barrier created by Drew's ability, he gets hit by Yuji on the arm and he blocks it, but we see him start to vibrate again, and this is what Yuji is doing with his ability, or I don't know, manipulation of cursed energy, because Yuji is aiming directly for the barrier between the soul of Sukuna and Megumi's. And by doing this, he's able to slowly pull Megumi's soul back up from after it was submerged. When Sukuna did the bath, way back before he fought Gojo, and then of course he was fully submerged after we saw Gojo kill the Orozu, who was actually in the vessel of Sumiki, who was like the only person that Megumi really deeply cared about, aside from his friends, but you know what I'm talking about. But by doing this, he's disrupting the quote-unquote harmony between Sukuna's soul and Megumi's body. So yeah, this is like Yuji's plan to save Megumi. It always kind of was. He needed to manipulate their souls in some way, and as we've been speculating about for a couple months now, Yuji for sure learned this from the notes that were left behind by Tsukumo, which she gave to Choso before she was killed by Kenjaku. And during that 1 month skip before Gojo versus Sukuna, that's when he supposedly practiced all this stuff along with learning reverse curse technique. So yeah, every time that Yuji is able to hit him successfully with this cursed energy reverberation that's targeting the barrier of the soul, it also reduces Sukuna's cursed energy output, which is pretty interesting. Not like his cursed energy, like as a whole, as his fuel source, but his ability to like use it essentially. And because of that, it weakens his body. And their whole plan is to just keep doing this until Sukuna can no longer use Hollow Wicker Basket, because if his cursed energy output falls, then he can't use the barrier ability anymore, because he's kind of using that with his two hands on the bottom, and then he's fighting them with his two hands on top. And then Sukuna posits that they're going to use Angel's technique, Jacob's Ladder, to eradicate the cursed object, which is his pinky finger that he force-fed to Megumi. So then, in theory, he would be completely rid of Sukuna and his soul, I guess, since he completely transferred it to his pinky. And yeah, so first of all, this is confirming that Akotsu does have Angel's curse technique. He copied it, which I guess happened during the 1 month time skip as well. And I'll get into how he was probably able to do that, because it's going to come up again here. But while they're going at it in a really awesome sequence, let me also just say that this chapter is pretty incredible. Like, the fight scene in it is amazing. Like, once the anime finally catches up to this, which, I don't know, might be season 4 or, I don't know, maybe season 5 or something, not really sure, but it's going to be an incredible episode. Like, Rika's, like, throwing Yuji like a missile at him. Akotsu continually using space manipulation in combination with his sword strikes. Really amazing stuff, but Sukuna says that he's still unable to use his domain expansion after the fight with Gojo, using so much cursed energy and damaging his brain and all that stuff. But his reverse curse technique is also still sluggish, although he's still able to use it, of course. We saw he regenerated his hand after he cut it off, and we're going to be talking about that again. But he says that his cursed energy at this point matches Akotsu's. So I guess Sukuna's at half of his cursed energy, because I think Akotsu himself said that Sukuna has like double the amount that he does. And since he's been using Hollow Wicker Basket, protecting himself from the sure hit of Akotsu's domain, he's unable to use the world-cutting dismantle. The dismantle that he was able to learn from Maharaga after he had adapted to Gojo's Limitless, which in my opinion is like a dismantle that cuts everything at a molecular level. So he can't use that while he's using Hollow Wicker Basket, because otherwise he would just start killing them instantly. Like, pretty sure not even Yuji and Akotsu can stop the world-cutting dismantle. At this point, I don't really think there's anybody that can. I mean, it freaking killed Gojo, allegedly. But going further, they continue to go after Sukuna here, and like I said, an awesome fight, and Yuji winds up grabbing Sukuna by the arm in like an armbar, while Sukuna is still fighting off Akotsu's strikes with his other hand. But while Yuji has him in the armbar position, Sukuna's hand, of course, is on his chest, and he starts to like cleave him up, like checker pattern on the chest. But before he can complete it, Akotsu uses cursed speech, and he tells Sukuna, "Don't move." And that stops him from just blowing Yuji's chest apart, which is an awesome sequence. Like, finally, we're getting to see cursed speech being used on Sukuna here. And this was, I think, the first technique that Akotsu may have copied, right? Because it happened way back in the beginning of Volume 0 when he and Inumaki had went on that little solo mission to take on that cursed spirit that Geto had released. And it makes you think, like, if this does work on Sukuna, I mean, they are in his domain after all, and he is exhausted, but it probably would have been better to send Akotsu and Higuruma instead of Yuji, because, Higuruma could have pulled out the Executioner's sword, after going through his domain as he did, and then Akotsu could have just been like, don't move, and then he would have gotten cut by the Executioner's sword, right? But I digress. It would have been too easy. But Akotsu hits him with a thin icebreaker, which of course is Uro's technique. We went over that in the review for last week's chapter. And after blasting Sukuna away, he gets this follow-up hit with Rika, who double axe hand sledges him down into the ground. Like I said, just awesome choreography, great action sequences in this chapter. But then Sukuna just rebounds and he hits Yuji and Akotsu with a couple of cleaves and slashes them up, but doesn't kill them, of course, because these are just surface wounds for the most part because of their reinforced cursed energy and their ability to use reverse curse technique now. A year ago, this would have been fatal for sure. Then he kicks Rika in the face and cleaves her hand off by touching it. And he says that, if I don't make direct contact, I won't be able to leave a fatal wound. Meaning that, he's not being able to kill Rika and Yuji and Akotsu with these cleaves or these dismantles because he's, firing at them like projectiles. But if he touches them, with his hand and then uses cleaver dismantle, then he can fatally wound them. Just cut, clean through them like you would a piece of cheese or something. But real quick, guys, today at 3 p.m. Eastern, Gamer Subs is dropping their Gamer Soups instant noodles. They come in beef, chicken, and vegetable flavors, and these things are great. I mean, who doesn't like cup ramen? And now that Gamer Subs makes them, I'm totally on board with this. If you've been gaming or studying or whatever you're doing and you need a quick meal because you're hungry or whatever, this is perfect for that. It even comes with a fork, which is really cool. And you can get these while supplies last by clicking the link in my description and of course using code BIGZ for 10% off. Of course, you can still grab some great Gamer Subs and caffeine free. Both have the great nootropics in it that give you that focus and energy. They also have these awesome sus bars, which are only 100 calories and only has 1 gram of sugar and 8 grams of protein. My favorite flavor is the chocolate. I cannot get enough of these things. They also have Gamer Tea in both caffeinated and non-caffeinated. I personally really like the caffeine-free sleepy time with theanine. And you can try to get yourself a waifu cup, but there's a good chance they might be sold out, but you could try anyway. And he compares this to when he fought against Ryu. And he says that, it's just the same with him, because when he originally fought against Ryu, he did hit him with a projectile cleave, but it didn't kill him. It cut the surface of him like you would with a sword. And then he was like, whoa, you're tougher than I expected. I won't underestimate you again. And then he just speed blitzed Ryu after that and just went straight through his face. Unfortunately, taking him out instantly. I wish Ryu was still around, but it is what it is. Kind of seems like a waste of a character to me, but that's just my opinion. He doesn't think Akotsu and Yuji are as tough as Ryu, so I guess this is, Gege putting some respect on Ryu's name despite doing him so dirty. And Sukuna also points out in this small monologue that Akotsu, of course, is only targeting Sukuna with the sure hit of the domain, but not Yuji, which is difficult to do because normally anyone inside of a domain except the sorcerer that is casted is going to be getting hit by the sure hit. That's just how it works. But he's able to manipulate the barrier so that it's not hitting Yuji, which, makes sense. It kind of has to happen that way. And along with pointing out, how much tougher the sorcerers have been since they've shown up since that 1 month time skip, along with Yuji getting reverse curse technique, he's like, just what have all you been up to this past month? And Yuji's like, hard work and determination. And then Akotsu cuts him off and he's like, we cheated. He's like, oh. And then they're like, And at first I was like, wait, what are they talking about? In the spoilers, I didn't really get all the spoilers, so I was like, I wasn't sure what to make sense of this. But it's because Akotsu is just chalking this up to the fight that Sukuna had with Gojo. If Sukuna was just fighting them at full power, essentially, they would have been killed, which is probably the case. But since he's been so weakened and exhausted after his fight with Gojo, they actually have a chance to take him down now. Essentially, that's what they're saying. Which is, pretty much the case here, I guess. Then they start going after Sukuna again, and Akotsu busts out Charles's curse technique, and he draws a manga panel on him. So, Let me just update you on Charles Bernard real quick, because this was Hikari's first opponent in the culling game. And he's still alive, by the way. Like, we do get a small update on him trying to see what's happening inside of Kotsu's barrier, but he can't see. Like, he's with the other Z fighters watching the Cell games right now. You know, these other sorcerers out there who could be on the battlefield, but, you know, they're just doing nothing. But anyway, Charles's curse technique, he was using with like his curse tool, which is like a big staff version of like a mangaka pen or a G pen. I think it was called G War Staff. And if he can take the blood of his opponent, he can draw like a manga panel, like a square on his opponent. And then this allows him to see into the future for like a second. But if he gets more blood, then he can look, you know, a couple more seconds or whatever into the future. Like if he keeps doing it, he can see further and further. And this is like, I think Gege, the way that he was trying to make sense of this was like, if you're looking at a manga page, you know how it starts at the top from the right to the left. If you just look at the bottom of the page, you're seeing into the future instantly. You know what I mean? So that's kind of like what this technique represents. But more literally, like in the actual series, it's just you're able to see like a second into the future. So when a Kotsu does this to Sukuna, he's able to see 1 second into the future, which is like huge here because, you know, in battle manga, a second is like a minute. And if you're wondering like, okay, wait, how did a Kotsu get Charles's technique? Well, I guess he got it the same way that he got Angel's technique. It was during the time skip when they were all together and they were formulating their plans, and Akotsu was like, okay, let me copy your techniques. And it's like, okay, how does he copy techniques? Because coming into the end of the chapter here, and I'll get into that because it's going to happen one more time here, because after Akotsu hits Sukuna, after using Charles's future sight ability here, as Sukuna says, clairvoyance, Sukuna starts listing off the techniques that Akotsu has. He says Angel's Jacob's Ladder, Uro's Space Manipulation, Drew's Barrier on the Path of Shikigami's technique, Inumaki's Curse Speech, and Charles's manga future sight clairvoyance thing. And then he also speculates that he could have Limitless, and he's like, no, he shouldn't be able to control without the 6 eyes. And it's like, why did Sukuna even bring that up? It really makes you wonder, because I don't think Akotsu has Limitless, but he could. I mean, yeah, he doesn't have the 6 eyes, so in theory he shouldn't be able to use it, but he could still copy it. So I do think this is going to come into play at some point. I mean, we have to remember that Gojo and Akotsu are distant relatives, or they both share a very, very distant ancestor in Michizane Sugawara, who became one of the 3 big vengeful curse spirits. I've talked about this many times. I don't know why Gege even brought this up, because it never seems to come into play. I really thought Michizane Sugawara was going to come back, but I guess he's not. But this doesn't mean that they're like directly related, you know? It's not like they're like cousins or something. It's like people in Asia having like Genghis Khan as an ancestor or something like that, you know? So I don't think it means that Akotsu can just develop the 6 eyes, or because of that he could just use Limitless. But Gege brought this up for a reason. I don't want to speculate too much about it, because we've already talked about the possibilities of Gojo coming back. It's like 50-50 at this point. But because Sukuna thinks that he knows all of the techniques that Akotsu can use, Akotsu's like, well then I guess Sukuna will be caught off guard by the one technique that he hasn't seen used, which means that this one will work. And then he grabs a katana, knowing that it's going to be the technique that he needs to use against Sukuna here, because, you know, after he grabs the katana he knows what technique it's going to be. Then he pulls some space, you know, using Uro's technique, and then he pierces his sword through it. Really cool technique here, but Sukuna as usual grabs it, but then Akotsu activates the technique on it, which is Cleave, Sukuna's own technique, and he hits him in the face with it. And that's the end of the chapter. Sukuna's like, wait, what? And the narration is like, bitten by his own fangs. So, how is Akotsu getting all of these techniques? Well, I'm pretty sure it's because of the condition that is required for him to copy techniques, and it seems to be Rika needs to consume the blood or flesh of the individual that has the technique. I'm pretty sure it's the blood. So how did we find this out? Well, back when Akotsu was fighting against Uro and Ryu, he eventually unleashed Rika against them. And it got to the point of where Rika just straight up bit off Uro's arm. And then after like her arm was flopping on the ground, Rika like ate it, or at least chomped on it, like a dog chewing on a toy or something. And then, you know, a chapter or two after that, when he was fighting against Ryu tried to hit Akotu point blank with the granite blast, but then Akotu manipulated the space and deflected the blast upwards. And Ryu was like, wait, how did he use Uro's technique? And it's like, what could be the condition to copy it? And then he remembered Rika eating her arm. He was like, oh, that's it. So that leads us, the readers, to assume that, oh, it must be blood or flesh. And I'm thinking it's blood because back when he kills Druve, he just slices him down the chest and we see the blood come out, and then he gets the technique. I guess Rika invisibly is consuming it or something, or maybe Akotu needs to just have the blood on him. I don't know. It seems to be Rika is involved in this at some extent, because also way back, you know, I was talking about when he copied Inumaki's technique, that curse like drew blood from Inumaki, because Inumaki was like coughing up blood during that sequence. So we can assume it was around then when Rika or Akotu was able to get the blood at some point. And that brings me back to what was happening during the time skip. I guess, you know, Akotu knowing this was like, hey, Angel and Charles, give us your blood so Rika can copy the techniques. But then it's like, why didn't he just take the techniques from everyone who had a technique that was capable of giving, you know? Like, take Higuruma's technique too. But I digress. Maybe it's not that simple. But those are all the contextual clues that we really have right now on what the conditions are for Akotu to copy a curse technique. And then the $1 million question is, how did he get Sukuna's? Well, Sukuna does draw blood in this chapter. Like I said, he gets cut by the path of the domain from Druve's ability, the little Rika Shikigamis. And we see, you know, the blood on his back. There's also a sequence where he like kicks Rika in the mouth, and it looks like he's getting blood from his foot in Rika's mouth. Not really sure if that's the point when it happened, but it goes back to also what I was saying about how, I think it was like 2 or 3 chapters ago when Sukuna was fighting against Higuruma. Higuruma was about to stab him in the hand with the Executioner Sword, which would have been a guaranteed kill, but then Sukuna cut off his hand at the last second. And then that hand was kind of just flopping on the ground, I guess. We don't really see it. So maybe when Akotu came to the battlefield, Rika ate Sukuna's hand that was on the ground. And then that's how they got the technique, maybe. It's either that or, I don't know, the last Sukuna finger that's out there. Maybe Gojo did have it and he like did something to let Rika get a sample of it. I mean, you can't really destroy the finger, I guess only with Jacob's ladder, Angel's ability, but there's just so many variables right now, so many options for how Rika could have copied this technique. It's not like inexplicable, and it'll probably be explained in the next chapter, I suppose. But let me know what you think about this chapter in the comments, guys. If you liked it, please give it a like, and please subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.